Washington State is known for many things: rain, timber, software, wine, and of course, rain. It also has a long history of surfing along the coast.
For every person it's different, and it's all felt in your heart. And because of that, there's no wrong, there's no right, as long as you're not hurting somebody else.
Guys like offshore winds, or I like it oil slick glass, just no wind, and kind of a hazy day, and paddling into what I call kind of a small wave, about 5 foot, and getting in early and making my turn. And there's something so fluid about that. And then if you can line up such that you can hear the crack of that wave. Now, rather than just the roar of the ocean, you can hear the particular crack of that wave, or maybe feel the wind escaping off of the pocket or the tube and blow on your back. And that's a wonderful feeling.
Either surf or you've never surfed. That's what they say, you know. I surf, I'd say I'm a weekend warrior right now. Occasionally I'll go out during the week. But for me, it's somewhat of and not just for me, I'm sure for a lot of surfers, it's a lifelong to youth.
Surfing dates back as far as 1,000 years in Hawaii, the birthplace of the sport. The Calvinist missionaries who arrived in Hawaii in the 1820s found surfing's state of undress and the mixing of the sexes to be unacceptable and banned the sport. In the early 1900s, surfing was reintroduced at Waikiki Beach by Alexander Hume Ford, a globe-trotting promoter. Then Duke Kahanamoku, an avid waterman, further popularized the sport. Duke became a strong advocate for surfing and is the only surfer to appear on a U.S. postage stamp. He helped introduce surfing in California, New York, and Australia. From all accounts, California surfing had become rooted in 1948. In 1959, the release of the surfing film Gidget boosted the sport's popularity tremendously, from less than 5,000 to over 2 million, moving surfing from an underground culture into a national phenomenon. Pypo boarding, or piper boarding as it was called when introduced in Washington State, originated in Hawaii, likely as a subculture of surfing. Pypo means kick, which is what the rider would do when the board slowed: kick it out, run and jump back on it and continue the ride.
I got involved in piper boarding back in probably '63 when it was introduced. I'm not sure where it came from, but it was part of my life back then, and it was a big deal for us. Well, I lived in Aberdeen, and like I say, I'm not sure where it came from. Who was the first person that I learned it from, but we were, part of this Grays Harbor group of people who started doing this. You throw it on that, just as a wave is receding, as a thin layer of water on a gradual beach, and you throw it and then you sprint and you jump on this thing, and believe me, it's really slippery. I couldn't do it today. I'm sure I'd be in the ER. But you could go alongside the surf, or you could head down the beach gradually and into the surf. And you could go, a long way, depending on the thickness of the water that was left from the wave. It was also really tough when you ran out of water and the board would stop and you're going at a pretty good speed, and you would tumble. We were pretty flexible back then. Today I couldn't do that. We then started to design our own boards, and we started to build our own boards. And my dad was really good about letting me use his tools, and And working in the garage, we would start cutting out these round boards out of plywood and painting them, and then we would make a bunch of boards, and then my dad had an old Corvair van, orange, and we would pack it full of the boards and head out to the beach, out to Ocean Shores, and we'd set them up along the truck, and I mean, people, especially the tourists, would come and they would buy them, and so it was really cool. And then we started changing the shapes of the boards. Some of them were longer, trying to get them to be a little bit more like a surfboard. But I think still, all in all, the round shape worked best because you could throw it and spin it. Paperboarding it seemed to be really gaining in popularity at the time. And more people were coming down to the beach, and it was sort of the new thing.
I started surfing on the Washington coast in 1963 when I was 13. I guess it all started when we were skimboarding on Alki Beach, where I lived down on Alki Beach in Seattle. I had a lot of friends who had moved up from California, and they were surfers, and we aspired to be surfers. And we started out skimboarding, building skimboards and out of big round disc out of plywood, and beveling the edges. And then on low tide, Alki was a great place to skimboard. So I had committed to buying my first surfboard when I was 13. It was at that time that I met a man from West Seattle who later became a great influence in all of our lives. That was Ray Walters. Ultimately, he gave me my first ride down to Point Grenville. That was in September of '63, at age 13, when I went out there for the first time and rode the Soup. The North Beaches were, as far as I know, the first beaches to be surfed. That's just my understanding. And that went all the way back to the Emersons at their Loa Shake Mill. I was quite intrigued by that article written in the Surfers Journal and the research they had done regarding that event. It was, I think, in 1908 or thereabouts, where they had moved over from Hawaii and brought surfing with them to the Washington coast.
I wrote an article in 2006 that was published in the Surfers Journal concerning the history of surfing in Washington and my family's part in that. My great-great-grandfather was from the East Coast, and I guess he came over and tried to cut his hand at a couple of things, farming in San Jose. How he didn't succeed at farming in San Jose, I have no idea, but somehow that didn't work out. But he ended up working for a ship captain or builder in San Francisco named Asa Simpson. And at some point, Asa Simpson developed such confidence in George H. Emerson that he sent him up north to try to find a good location for a bay where they could harvest wood and mill it for the shipbuilding effort. And so this George H. Emerson founded sort of found Gray's Harbor and founded the Northwest Lumber Company. And that became a great big success. And at some point he bought out Asa Simpson's interest. And George H. Emerson became kind of a scion of the Hoquiam, Aberdeen area. So George H. Emerson's son, Ralph Damon, that's my grandmother's father, he went to Stanford. There he met Wilfred Dole. The way that the Aloha Lumber Mill was started, as I understand it from my family, is that George H. wanted to start milling further up from the Hoquiam area, and found this plot of land and invited the boys up, his son and whatever friends he wanted to bring up, to come and help establish the mill. Wilfred Dole and a lot of his brothers would come up also to help, because obviously they were paid, and this was the early, probably 1902, 1903 time period, and they all came up to help build that during the summers. And because of I I have to think that because of not just Wilfred, but because of the presence of all of his brothers who probably made a big impact on everyone, they called it the Aloha. They called the mill the Aloha. And then when the railroad came in and actually put a depot there, that founded the town of Aloha, Washington. So most of what I know is, well, shoot, I should say all of what I know is from readings and from what my grandmother had told me. And so I was always a fan of, not a fan, but enamored with my grandmother and my grandfather. They seemed to come from an era that was just so stern and unusual and elegant in a weird way. It was very foreign to my growing up in the 70s in Southern California. But I guess it was some years, I've forgotten exactly when, but they were living in Mendocino. And for a number of years I was living in New York City, so coming to Mendocino was just such a departure. But there was always this surfboard on the wall outside, you know, held up with iron nails on the wall, and it said RDH, which was Ralph Damon Emerson's initials, and that's my grandmother's father. And she gave me that surfboard when they left Mendocino, which was really heartbreaking for me because I'd always sort of developed a relationship, and I think all of us do at some point, develop a relationship with a place that relates to a parent or grandparent. You know, I took that surfboard to a shaper in Santa Cruz, fairly prominent surfboard shaper named Ward Coffey, and he's a friend, and I knew that he would be stoked on this, and I brought the surfboard to him, and I said, "Will you take a look at this and give me, you know, what are your thoughts?" And the first thing he did, of course, is track down drawings and map it out, break out the calipers and all that business. But he was really taken with how clean the beveling was in the bottom, and that this was a perfect Alai board. And he said, "You know, this is not just some guys in Washington trying their best at a plank of cedar wood. This is like people who knew exactly what they were doing." So it's unlikely that Wilfred would have gathered that knowledge at his young age. So it's more likely his older brothers, and so that's the part we have to surmise, like, where did that knowledge of that kind of shaping come from? And so it's a guess, but I think it's a pretty damn good guess.
The early Hawaiian surfboards were comprised of three primary shapes: the Olo, the Kiko-O, sometimes referred to as the longer Alaya board, and the shorter Alaya. The Olo is thick in the middle and gradually gets thinner toward the edges and is typically around 16 feet long. The Kiko-O ranges in length from 12 to 18 feet, and the popular Alaya board is around 8 feet long. These were made of wood and were much heavier than today's modern boards.
My mother's family is from Pacific Beach, and we went to the Moclips Museum, had a fundraiser, and I met a woman named Patty Cartwright, I think it was, and she suggested, why don't we go to Point Grenville, and I'll take you on there. And of course, it's Quinault Indian land, so you can't really readily just walk on the beaches. And she said she could organize that, and we said, absolutely. And so we went, we being myself, Patty, and my ex-wife's brother, who was visiting also. And he had made these surfboards, and they were god-awful. They were, you know, foam and no stringer, and they were just a mess. But there was something really beautiful about homemade surfboards that he was making, and surfing them at Point Grenville. So there's sort of this cycle about it that I like. So I said, yeah, sure, bring those crazy old boards, and he did. And I got a big, you know, 5'4" wetsuit. I'd never wear 5. I mean, that's just, you know, too much rubber, but I felt it appropriate in the situation. And it was crazy. I mean, we drove up there, and I'd heard about Point Grenville, and I'd seen all the family photographs.
Well, I was asked to go to a party with a girlfriend at Bob and Nancy Bedger's house in Pacific Beach, which is actually the Emerson mansion, which is Gavin's great-great-grandfather's place originally. And when I was there, Bob Betcher made sure that I met Gavin because he had inherited his Dole's surfboard made out of solid cedar. And he was pretty anxious to get to surf in the same place that his great-great-grandfather had. So we got together the next day and we got him up to Point Grenville on the beach. I believe it was February.
The water just, you know, it stays about knee deep for about 100 yards out there. It's just rolling in, and it wasn't surf as I typically think of surf, but I went out and tried riding on these things. There wasn't enough energy on it, but so I rode a couple prone, and it was more ceremonial than anything, but it was special. It was cool.
Probably the first time I surfed Point Grenville was spring in 1966. First time I went up there. And I enjoyed it. I don't think the waves were nearly as good as Westport, but there was girls there, and it was Washington. I was a teenager, and there was a scene there. There was a lot of guys surfing. There was the Rainier Beach guys, Dan Norton and Joe Carew and Winker and Brian Jett and other guys. I can't remember their names now, but just their faces. And we camped on the beach. George South was there, and he had a beach shack. And so I surfed there quite a bit.
I met George back in 1965. I was with my sister and my two cousins who have a place down the street, and we were walking the beach, and George and Dorian Brenton and Randy Bennett drove up the beach and asked us girls, we wanted to go to a party. So that's how we met. We were all just young kids, young teenagers, and so were they. So, and we've stayed friends all these years. The surfers I remember back then were Dorian Brenton and George South, Randy Bennett, Ron Ashelman, John Mann, Stan Gustafson, Daryl Woods, Rick Wagner, Lee Evans. That's pretty much the ones I knew. Well, they'd camp up at Point Grenville, but they always knew there was a meal waiting for them here and company. So they'd drive down and have dinner with us probably once or twice a week.
We had attended some of the Oregon surfing contests the previous years, and we thought it would be a good idea to have one, to host one up here and invite them and to have a lot of fun. It was the whole contest thing was looked down upon by a lot of the surfers who were soul surfers. But I kind of enjoyed both of the competition and the soul surfing, so to speak. So we, after a lot of preparation, on July 4th through 7th, we had the contest, and we had people all the way from Oregon, a few from California, one guy even from Texas, and it turned out to be quite the event. And we had 4 events and one paddling race as well. It was kind of fun. We had a great time, and the surf was pretty good, and by and large a success. The Washington Surfing Association was started by Ray Walters in 1965, and this was in reaction to the beach at Point Grenville being closed. The tourists had turned the beach into their personal drag strip, and the litter was strewn about, and some of the other people would paint on these beautiful seascape rocks, graffiti, what amounts to graffiti, only it was their high school year, and rent in '65, that was a big one that was there. And so the Quinault Indian Nation, they closed the beach, and Ray responded by inquiring and asking what the conditions would be to have it reopen, and they were really cooperative, and understanding that. But they set some rules down, and the rules were that we had to straighten up and fly right, or clean the beach up and stop, cooperate with the police and stop this, get things under control again. So that was the primary objective of the Washington Surf Association, was to get the beach reopened, and Ray was successful in doing that. He headed up the Washington Surf Association for the first 3 years, and then the final year he turned it over to me, and he made me president of it, and so I took over that chore the last year. We had beach cleanups at the end of every weekend, and then we provided, I think it was 20 55-gallon drums full of at the entrance to Point Grenville, and that's for the garbage. We had garbage pickup every week, and it really improved the whole logistics of Grenville, and it worked well for until 1969, when the beach closed for the final time after the Washington Surfing Association disbanded. When I got back from Vietnam, I started surfing primarily at Westport. Westport became the new safe place to surf, and it was an easy drive from Seattle or wherever, and that became the popular place to surf, and that carried on until, well, to this very day.
It was called Twin Harbors State Park, but now it's called West Haven. Be out there all day, a pair of short pants on, and one top of a wetsuit, all day at the jetty, no water, no food, no suntan lotion. The groins are, along the cove there, and they got all that armoring and riprap, and then when it goes around the corner, there's I can't even remember how many jetties are there. At the time, I think there was 4, and they stuck out there like that. Yeah, and we'd surf all 3 on the tide, and I think the third one is that got real good, and they called that gas chambers. That was quite a wave, quite a wave.
Hey there, my name's Al Purley, and I own the surf shop, and you and I own the surf shop out here in Westport, Washington. If it weren't for y'all, we wouldn't be able to be here. I remember the first 2 weeks I was here, we were renting a little room in a motel down the beach in Grayland, and it rained and rained and rained and rained, and I thought, what have I done? And then the sun came out, and it was beautiful. I went down to the beach, perfect little waves. Someone came in the other day and said there were 3 surf spots in this town. And I said, really? I thought there was just 1. And turns out all these years there's been 3. You got West Haven State Park, or the jetty, and then Half Moon Bay, or the cove, and then back inside the bay there's like what's called the groins, and some people call it the fingers. Water temperatures in Westport actually range from the mid-40s probably up into the mid-60s. There's a few weeks in the summer where we get into the 60s. Generally speaking, though, it's in the probably lower to upper 50s.
Yeah, I've surfed Westport several times. Actually, our Washington Pacific Coast manager lives in Westport, has a great view of the ocean, so it's a great time going out there and staying the night at his place. The jetty is one of the, if not most recognizable spot for surfing in Washington. I'm not really sure what else could be. I think everybody who's surfed in Washington, and some regularly, has been to the jetty in Westport, or potentially the groins. So Westport has a special spot for the surf community, I think, in Washington. I think you're seeing that grow. You look at Todd Fisher's art gallery that he had for the last couple summers there. It's really brought like a sense of surfing culture to the community in general, not just to the beach. So I think it's a slowly moving forward process with the surf community there, but it's growing. My role generally is to oversee and help the chapters, our various volunteer chapters, which make our organization so strong, achieve local programs and local campaigns that better affect water quality, beach access issues, whatever it may be that they are interested in their own backyard within the state of Washington. Surfrider was started in 1984 by a group of revolutionary, visionary surfers. Their focus really was coastal development issues, and that was impacting their surfing area, whether it was water quality or the access itself. So they started that up, and since then we've grown substantially into an international organization. Within Washington State, Surfrider Foundation started working approximately about 15 years ago. Surfrider Foundation has approximately 85 chapters worldwide. That's along the Pacific coast of the United States into BC, as well as the East Coast, the Great Lakes, down into Texas. Internationally, we have affiliates from Japan to Argentina to Morocco to Puerto Rico, and on and on. So it truly is an international organization that really brings a lot of people out to support the mission, and that's protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches. The Clean Water Classic generally is a two-day event. It starts out on a Saturday. We generally have a Friday night arrival for most people, and this most recent one we had live music Friday night. So it's kind of a celebration of the entire over the entire weekend of surfing the Pacific Northwest. This most recent one, which is our 13th annual Clean Water Classic, was possibly the best ever from what I've heard from people who've been attending it for a long time. Great weather and great waves, and I think everybody walked out of there very happy. The award ceremony was all smiles and all stoke. It was a great event to be a part of this last year.
While the surf scene was taking hold, there was a revolution in the music and car cultures.
Well, I think that, you know, the music was a big influence then. Certainly the Beatles were like, you know, this is, I mean, it was just incredible. And the Beach Boys, and we always liked to have that. We considered ourselves sort of surfers, even though we weren't really, I wasn't really surfing. Some of the other kids were, but it was that whole scene, you know. And the Silver Seagull, and what was the other one? The Dunes? That was out at Westport in Grayland, and that was a big deal, and they always attracted really great talent, and so we would go out there and do that.
Got started in the music business when I was in junior high school, listening to every top 40 record and hanging out at the local radio stations, and decided I wanted to be in radio, which I finally did, and got licensed, and thought if you can get paid to sit here and play your favorite records, I think that's better than working at the veneer plant, which I had done Grace Harbor Veneer when I was in high school. After doing radio for a few years and out of state, I moved back to Grace Harbor. Steve West, who a lot of people would know, is another Hookwind boy. Steve and I were partners in a company called S&S Promotions. And we started doing dances, primarily Northwest bands, the Whalers and people like that. And we decided one day that we were going to expand our horizons and bring in somebody big. So in 1964, in February, we hired the Beach Boys to come in and play because they were coming into Seattle on a Saturday night, and we knew they'd be up here, so they actually flew in on a Friday night and came down, and we picked them up at SeaTac, brought them down, and we had a Beach Boys concert in the Hookwind High School gym with the legendary Beachcombers, and also with a band called the Capris and Gail Harris. The Hookwind High School, to my knowledge, at that time had never had a dance or show, especially in their gym, because they were very protective of the floor for basketball. We'd done all our shows in the Armory in Aberdeen, and about 2 weeks before the Beach Boys concert, the Aberdeen, the Armory guys called us and canceled our date because of the Vietnam thing was heating up and they needed more training dates. And it's like, well, I said, wait a minute, we have a contract. You can't cancel our date. And they went, oh, really? Well, watch us. So here we are with the Beach Boys. We paid them a bunch of money, you know, contract advances, advertising. We ended up getting the Hookwind High School gym. The Beach Boys came and they did a great job. It's back when Brian Wilson was still playing with them, and they had the striped shirts and they did all their thing, and it was a great concert. There wasn't any place out on the South Beaches where they were running dances, and Steve and I went out looking around, and we found the Acosta Grange, and I think it was Steve's idea to name it the Silver Seagull. I was told that some nights there was upwards of 500 people in the building, and I was also told that some people would go back and and open the back door, and they'd start a fake fight out on the there was a railing with a deck out there, and about 100 people would rush out to watch the fight, and then they'd close the door and lock it, and they'll let another 100 people in through the front door. Yeah, they opened the dunes in 1966, and we knew then, of course, we quit running the Grange or the Silver Seagull, because there's no way you can compete with, that. And so that was the end of the Silver Seagull era, once the dunes opened. Well, I think the surf culture brought people down there. And that was just sort of an extra little enhancement to the crowds, because primarily for the dances, it was the locals, and kids are out there camping and things like that. But it definitely, it brought more attention to the area, and it started an industry which lasted for quite a while. When I grew up, the push rods in Hookwind, that was the big dog, baby. We had the Kings in Aberdeen, and we had the push rods in Hookwind, and if you had a car and you wanted to be in that club, you had to have a certain amount of modifications to it. And it was a prestigious thing because it was a great organization, and that's how I got involved with the car thing. And then eventually it was sort of like the legendary Beachcombers became the official push rods band. We used to rehearse in their little Quonset hut down there by the river, and it sounds pretty crazy by today's standards, but in those days that was, that was cool. I remember the college, what was called the college quarter, which actually, if you could get rid of all the tourist traffic and all the peripheral, it was a great place. And I personally would never have engaged in street racing myself. However, there was a lot of racing that had gone on out there, and the only problem was it started out as a pretty good place, but as the traffic started building up in the 60s, people going out to Westport and the tourism and all that, and even on late at night, there was so much traffic out there that it actually it could have become hazardous. And so, being an enterprising group of street racers, other locations were spotted that weren't quite so busy with tourist traffic, so everybody could go out and race. I guess one of my favorite memories would be sort of all-encompassing. I left here in 1975 to go into record business, and but I don't think even when I was here, I realized sort of the legacy that we had created down here with KHOK radio, which later became KGHO, and then the legendary Beachcombers, and we weren't the only band, obviously, down here. There were some other great bands, too, but the Rocker nightclub that I had, and things that I had done and other people had done, too. And we just sort of took it for granted, well, this is fun, and it's a good way to, make $1. And then now, even 25, 30, 40 years later, I still get emails from people saying, thank you for doing this, or boy, we went to one of your shows at the Harbor Arena, and pick a name, we had so many bands come through there. And boy, we'll never forget Paul Revere and the Raiders at the Aberdeen Armory, and that kind of stuff. And it makes me feel good to know that I, along with the guys in our band and the radio people that I worked with, and I think we did create something that has people want to know about and hear about and remember. I think that would be the best memory I would have, is just sort of walk away and look back and say, hey, we had a good time, we had a lot of fun, and that's about as good as it gets, isn't it?
There will likely never be a special time like this again.